Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. The 2024 WNBA provided some of the highest viewership and attendance the league has seen in a while. Many of the league's top players like Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson, who have multiple MVPs and championships, put together historic performances last season. But much of the 2024 season was highlighted by the rookie phenom Caitlin Clark. Let's not get that wrong. Caitlin Clark. Fans turned out more than ever before to watch Clark and the Indiana Fever play. Her game against the Washington Mystics set the league attendance record as the most attended WNBA game in history.
Wow, Tia. Caitlin Clark's impact, it really has raised the popularity of the league as a whole. The league reported an increase in its merchandise sales and social media engagement as well. And this new excitement around women's professional basketball has folks interested in bringing a women's team back to Detroit. And all this new interest around women's basketball has us thinking about the trajectory of women in sports more broadly. Producer Carrie Jr. II is joining us in the studio now to talk through this. Welcome to this side of the show, Carrie.
Hello.
Howdy.
Good morning. Great first hour. How you doing?
Oh,
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, y'all doing well.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Not a biased compliment at all.
Not
We
at
will
all.
take it. Tell us, what's all this new energy around a WNBA team about?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that you all just rattled off there outlined it pretty perfectly. Caitlin Clark, a pretty household name at this point in sports overall, seems to have been like this nitrous oxide for the WNBA. She's really propelled the league forward, and they were already seeing some success and seeing some growth already. But I mean, when Caitlin Clark hit the scene, it's just been like in the stratosphere. You listed the statistics. So yeah, the league's popularity because of those numbers, because of those attendance numbers, has caught the eye of a number of folks around here who are interested in bringing the team back. And so most notably, the Pistons owner, Tom Gores, Sheila Hemp Ford, who is the principal owner of the Lions, and GM CEO Mary Barra are spearheading a team of investors who have officially submitted a bid for an expansion team in Detroit. So that's got me excited.
Yeah, Carrie, it seems like it's promising right now. We also saw that Grant Hill was possibly signed up as well, former Pistons, and his wife, Tamia.
The Tamia Shuffle.
Yeah, that was very interesting to see all these people coming together collectively to kind of get the Shock back in the city, or at least just bring the team back. We don't know if it would be named the Shock again or not.
Yeah. I'm excited to see the Detroit Shock back. I was a big watcher back as a kid. So yeah, they might come back. Like you said, the team name, we don't know. I do know that the league has submitted a request for the name of the Shock, but they're submitting a bid to get a WNBA team here. The name, we don't know. But we have plenty of memories of basketball here. So the Detroit Shock was a team. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Detroit Shock. Do you all remember?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. They were, for the folks who don't know, the Shock was Detroit's WNBA franchise from 1998 to 2009, which was very short-lived, not long enough, in my opinion. And did y'all know they won 3 championships when they were here?
I didn't mean to say it so fast.
I
but
did not.
Won 3 WNBA championships.
That's why I was so upset when they left. It was just like, what are you doing?
were
This is a winning franchise.
Right. Yeah, they were a winning franchise. Unfortunately, in 2009, the owner, Bill Davison, who owns both the Pistons and the Shock, he passed away. And so when he passed away, both teams were sold, and that's why the Shock then moved initially to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and now they're currently in Dallas. They're the Dallas Wings, so that's kind of what happened to the team.
Dallas Wings.
Carrie, I've heard you use the word Dallas Wings.
No,
it sounds delicious.
It does.
I didn't know what wing it was when I heard the name either. I was like, is this an animal wing, or is this
chicken wing?
A snack?
Yeah.
Carrie, you've described being really excited about this. So you grew up going to games. Talk about what you would experience and what that meant, like what kind of impact the games had on you as a kid.
So I literally, when I was looking up some background information on the Detroit Shock, I was looking at old videos of the games, and I thought I remembered going to the championship game when they won in 2003. It wasn't that game, but I was watching the videos, and I was literally tearing up, like watching these games, because my mom, she bought season tickets all the time to the Detroit Shock back in the day. So she would take us to multiple games. And so I believe the Detroit Shock was the first professional basketball game I had ever gone to.
Wow.
I've probably only been to like 2 Pistons games. I hope I don't get crucified for this, but I've been to like at least 10, 20 Detroit Shock games.
I mean, way to read the room. You're talking to two women here,
say,
so
keep
of
it
course
going. Hype it up.
we're going to encourage that.
Fair.
Can we go deep just for 1 second here? Have you thought about the ways that perhaps watching the WNBA may have helped you to see women in new and different lights, to see them when it comes to their athleticism, their power, and to see them more multidimensional even? Or am I like speculating and putting too many good
especially as a
ideas
young
in your
man
head?
too. You're young man. You're coming into yourself, and this is what you're
I was
watching.
probably like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
When I saw those games. I hadn't done the thinking and reflection about going to those games, but I'm almost certain it did. I don't think I ever, growing up, felt like girls or boys were different in their ability to play sports. I don't recall thinking that ever. And my sister also played basketball a little bit when we were in elementary school. And I never had the pleasure of playing a co-ed team, so I don't know what it would have been like to directly compete. But I always was like, okay, there's just a girls team and there's a boys team, and that's just how it is. In fact, I didn't even really know that the WNBA was younger than the NBA, or that it was newer, or any of that kind of stuff, all the dynamics that are at play. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, this new energy around the WNBA, Caitlin Clark and the Shock, has us thinking about how far women's sports have come and where they still need to go, and how our perceptions around women's sports have continued to change and evolve.
Indeed. One of the things before we do move on to our next conversation here, talking about WNBA and women in sports in general, I just love to see the increase that we're seeing just in visibility, whether it's college, whether it is starting to see more high school sports televised as well, women's high school sports, but seeing women's college sports televised, women's college basketball, seeing the Dawn Kellys of it all, and just watching everybody come up. Even right now, my Spartans are doing really well, the women's team, so shout out to them. But just the increased popularity and seeing more young girls excited about possibly having avenues post high school to play sports. I mean, after a while, you hit that benchmark with women's sports, and you can't go further because there's no professional outlet for them. So I just think about what would that look like in the next 10, 15, 20 years if we'll start to see more professional outlets coming to life, whether it's a National Hockey League, or whether it's something else, volleyball even. But I'm really, really interested to see the future of women's professional sports.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned like hockey and those sports that are often kind of assumed to be boy sports, or sports that girls don't play. Like, I'm curious to see what that's like and what the landscape is like for young girls. And I know you're a hooper too.
I was
right?
a hooper, I was a volleyballer, and a
y'all were sports people?
softballer.
Okay,
Yeah,
so there's a lot to talk about. I'm curious to hear what y'all have to say with our guests. This will be an interesting conversation.
And shout out to the girl dads out there as well who, were right there with us. If we want to hear from you. Do you watch women's sports? Give us a call. Let us know which ones and why. The number is 313-577-1019.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we'll discuss how we reached this moment in women's basketball. This is the Metro on WDET. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Now that professional women's basketball has gotten new attention, we want to know how it's gotten to this point and whether the WNBA is appropriately positioned to seize the moment. Joining us now is Professor Risa Assard. She's a professor of sports management at the University of Connecticut. Professor Assard, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you this morning.
So we want to discuss how the WNBA has grown and changed, but we also want to understand how its evolution has changed us. Now, you, of course, study women's sports and understand a lot of the cultural dynamics at play with the league. But you've also had firsthand experience working in it. You at one point worked for a WNBA team, that's the Phoenix Mercury. When was this? And paint a picture, if you would, of how the league felt in its early years.
Yeah, thanks so much. I worked for the Mercury in 2008, so that's a long time ago at this point. And it was the team's 10th, 11th season. I was actually a fresh high school graduate. I missed a home game that I was supposed to be working at to go graduate from high school. And I say that because I think, reflecting on that moment and the role I was given as an 18-year-old, it's not a role that we would have seen an 18-year-old get in some more established leagues. And personally, right, that was thrilling. I loved being behind the scenes. I loved being right in the locker room, taking notes and quotes and writing up stats and reports after the games. And I also think the fact that a high schooler was the one doing that kind of, reflects where the league was at the time. And since then we've seen, tremendous growth. The league, back in 2008 and the early years, it was amazing to be part of. I loved going to games. I went to my first game in that inaugural season in 1997 and throughout kind of that next decade and on. And what I think is really cool about thinking about those moments and this moment is that, a lot of the stats that we're hearing today about these records, right? It is the most watched or it's the most attended. These are all actually caveated, right? So these records tend to say it's the most watched in 24 years, or it's the highest game attendance in 22 years, right? If we think about that, we can actually hear that the WNBA had tremendous support, right? A number of years ago. So those early years were super exciting. There was a lot of support for it. There were also some kind of road bumps in it. But kind of what we're seeing today is not we've never seen support for the WNBA before.
Could you talk a little bit about those road bumps and also that sense of feeling like you were a renegade, like you were a part of this blossoming new and exciting thing, and what the perception was that you saw from the outside? But first, we'll go to the roadblocks. What were they?
Yeah. Well, I do want to say I love this kind of framing as a renegade because it didn't always feel that positive. It was sometimes really hard to be a fan or to be working in women's sports. I think the road bumps were that, the league wasn't quite as popular in kind of a general cultural way. And there were a lot of stereotypes about who the players were and who the fans were and what it meant if you went to these games. The league had a difficult time figuring out kind of when and how to embrace the LGBTQ plus community, which were a core part of their fan base and still are. And for a number of years were supported. And then kind of, it was scary to be associated with the queer community. And so the league kind of took a step away and alienated some of their fan base until they found their way back. In 2014, they became the very first league to have a Pride Night, right? So it was this bumpy time trying to figure out, are you only selling family entertainment? Could this just be awesome sports, right? And it's super exciting and it's dramatic. Do the players always have to be role models? Can they just be athletes, right? How do we kind of hold all these truths at once that the WNBA is presenting this amazing opportunity for women athletes and what that means for girls like me who are in the stands, right? Boys like Carrie who are in the stands. And also, right, can they just be athletes? Can they just be competitors? Can they be out to win? And so I think it was really tricky. But certainly, go for it.
Oh, I was, no, please go on, Professor Assard.
Yeah, I was just going to say, right. And so I think in those tensions, that's when it was, I love this framing of renegade. It sometimes felt a lot harder. It felt sometimes lonely to be a WNBA fan. There weren't as many people around me. I couldn't go to school and talk about it with my friends or talk about it at summer camp with my friends. People didn't necessarily know who the players were or what was happening, or they didn't care. Worst case scenario, people said some really rude things to me when I would say I was going to a game or say I was excited about what happened. Best case scenario, maybe it was just kind of ignorance, right? Which also feels very alienating. And so there was this sense of being part of something really special, but also being really separate from a lot of other people who just hadn't quite found the W yet.
It has me wondering how much marketing was even happening at the time and who exactly the league was marketing to.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the league has tried to figure this out, and I think they've done a tremendous job in the last few years, really, nailing this down even better. I think in the early years we saw a lot of like kind of super femme glamour. Right, L'Oreal was one of the founding or early year sponsors of the league, so we see this kind of approach. We see a lot of like dads and daughters approach, and none of those are necessarily like wrong, but they are maybe a little bit one dimensional, right? And I think the league today is saying like, wait, we can have right beauty sponsors, and we can have super athletic sponsors, right, and we can have all of these other types of sponsors.
Right. We're able to see women in a more multi-dimensional light in the WNBA today. Now, the league currently consists of 13 teams. At one point, there were 16. What caused the league to shrink?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think here, this too, right? This narrative of like, it's growing, it's shrinking. What do we mean? So the league started with 8 teams, right? So when the league was up to 16 or now about to be right, kind of back to 13, that's still a lot of growth off of where it started in 1997 with 8 teams. The league shrunk in terms of its, team size, I guess you could say, as a result of some investors just not really willing to bear with what may have been some losses over the years, right? And I think we all know in business, like businesses lose money before they make money. And men's sports have done this for decades, right? They lose money before they make money, like so much money. And that appetite or that resiliency to invest in women's sport through those growing pains to get to this moment, some of the early investors just weren't willing to kind of put those deep pockets behind the teams. We can see now that maybe that was a bit short-sighted, right? That these teams are incredibly profitable. They have skyrocketing valuations. Teams are operating in the black. Like it's really, really exciting. But in the early years, that appetite or that risk as it related to women's sport just wasn't there for some of the key investors.
So there was the issue of skittish investors, and we know much has been made of the WNBA's finances. The league is reported to have lost money despite having so much success. So how can that be, considering it just had a massively successful season? Is it realistic to expect the WNBA to someday reach the same level as the NBA?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the trajectory of the NBA and the WNBA, so the NBA started basically exactly 50 years before the WNBA did. And if you look at, not like 2024 to 2024 data, right? You're not comparing NBA this year to WNBA this year. But if you look at kind of those numbers of the NBA in their 28th season or their 15th season or their 5th season, and you compare those relative numbers to the WNBA in their 5th, their 15th, their 25th season, we actually see that the WNBA is on a better trajectory than the NBA was back in those early years. And so I do think, right, women's sport is on a rocket ship right now. And it has over the years actually outperformed relative to some of those early NBA numbers. I also think there's sometimes reason to question, right, the numbers that the league might be putting out in a collective bargaining agreement year. So we know that the WNBA Players Association has opted out of their CBA. And so if I'm the league, I don't really want to say exactly how much money I'm making, because if I share that, I have to pay my players. And right from a business perspective, that isn't maybe truly in the league's, they might not see that as in their best interest, right? Or just like where the money is going. And so I think we can also question some of these numbers that we're kind of getting out in the public and what that might mean in this broader narrative, particularly in this moment when there's a collective bargaining agreement negotiation happening.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. We're discussing how the perception of the WNBA has changed over time. We're talking with Professor Risa Assard. She is a professor of sports management at the University of Connecticut. We also want to know if you watch women's sports. Give us a call and let us know. 313-577-1019. So as you mentioned earlier, in 2014, the WNBA was the first league to have a Pride Night. Former WNBA player Sue Bird also said in a 2020 interview that the WNBA does not get as much media coverage because its players are largely Black and LGBTQ+. Is there a little truth to that?
Yeah, I think both of these things are true. We know that women's sports in this country gets far less media coverage. And over the years, you can kind of compare, right, how athletes with different identities, Black, gay, straight, white, anything in between, right, how these athletes are being treated by the media. We can look at kind of some comparisons sometimes across women's sports too, to see who is celebrated and who is really valued. And so some research I did in the based off of the 2020 WNBA season found that Black athletes got basically half the amount of coverage as their white counterparts, right? So WNBA Black players got half the coverage as white WNBA athletes, despite making up 80% of the league. They won MVP, Rookie of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Sixth Woman of the Year, Most Improved Player, right? So we can see that even when we hold constant on-court performance, Black athletes were actually getting, in the WNBA, we're getting significantly less media coverage than their white counterparts.
And Professor, I'm thinking about just even the comparison that we can have, or like from last season, we have the Caitlin Clarks and the Angel Reeses, and that complete divide there that we saw in terms of who would get praised and who would not get praised, or who would get scolded for saying or doing certain things, and who wouldn't get scolded for certain things or behavior on the court. So can we just talk a little bit more about just what's going on in terms of what we're seeing on the court, as well as in marketing wise, in terms of our Black and white athletes, especially WNBA, because it seems like they have a little bit of a ways to go versus the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's be really clear. Media coverage kind of across the history of this country has been unfair to Black athletes, regardless of whether they're, athletes in men's sports or athletes in women's sports. More recently, that has looked different in men's sports than it does in women's sports, but staying focused here on kind of what we're seeing in the WNBA, I think it's also fair to say that this reflects some broader social trends, right? This isn't just happening in the WNBA and not happening anywhere else in society or anywhere else in media or anywhere else in pop culture, right? We know that people are treated differently based on their skin color, right? Based on their race, based on their sexual orientation, the storylines that are created about them. And so I think it's also relevant in this example you gave, right, of Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. So in the same study from the 2020 season, we found that Black athletes, they weren't just less likely to get media coverage, but they were also less likely to be centered in human interest stories or stories about league success. So when they got covered, they were covered in really kind of bland ways, just like here's how many points someone scored in a game, or in some stories around social justice, which is really great that they're getting credit for the work that they're doing. But it means that the narratives that are out there, are ignoring kind of who they are as full people or their role in the league's success, right? And I think that data maps on nicely, if also problematically, onto some of the narratives that we saw this past year, right? Who is getting the vast majority of kind of celebration for the league's success, and who is being left out of that narrative.
Professor Assard, equal pay for women has been a major discussion in sports. We know the U.S. women's national soccer team has fought this battle hard and won. What will it take for WNBA players to see the same sort of change happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have to imagine that the U.S. women's national team is talking right now with the WNBA players, right? We know that across the history of this country, women athletes have helped each other kind of take those big next steps for each other, knowing that the wins kind of will get shared all around. I think the big things that are happening in probably in these collective bargaining agreement conversations right now is not just about dollars for dollars, how much WNBA players are making, but actually about the percentage of revenue share. And so that's where we see a big difference between the NBA and the WNBA. And people like to talk about it's just dollars, right? It's just dollars and cents. And the reality is that WNBA players are not asking to get the same salary as their NBA counterparts. They're kind of historically have been asking to get the same percentage of league revenue. And so what that means is that NBA players now receive about 50% of all NBA league revenue, But WNBA players estimates put it at about 20% of league revenue. And so I think that's the number that players are really looking to move on, because if they do, they'll get more money in their pockets. But it's not like they're asking for NBA dollars. They're just asking for the same percentage of the labor that they produce.
And before we let you go, as the league gains recognition, as we see more players get higher platforms, more sponsorships, more deals in general, and their voices become more potent and more influential, how do you see these new voices impact our broader culture?
I mean, I think it's super exciting, right? It's super exciting that women athletes are being celebrated in the way that they are today. It doesn't mean that we don't have progress to make, but I also don't think that we should just kind of take for granted, right? The incredible momentum and movement that's brought us to today, the work of generations of employees and of athletes and of champions, for women athletes to be, in sports highlight shows, to be in sports sections and, have more media coverage than ever, to be, on televised games more than ever. And so that access to women's sport is helping women's sport really become part of a cultural phenomenon, right? Being at the Met Gala, being on magazine covers for non-sport publications, right? Just kind of having a voice in mainstream culture is really, really exciting.
Risa Bashard is a professor of sports management at the University of Connecticut. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro. Would love to chat with you again in the future.
Coming up, we'll continue discussing women's sports. We'll see how these dynamics play out at the high school level today. Plus, we want to hear from you. Do you watch women's sports? Why or why not? The number is 313-577-1019. This is the Metro on WDET. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. And we're asking you all, do you watch women's sport? The phone number is 313-577-1019, 313-577-1019. We would love to hear from you, but we are talking about the current state of women's sports and what the future may hold for girls who want to compete in their sport at the highest level. Joining us now in this discussion is Dr. Keetra Armstrong. Dr. Armstrong is a professor of sports management at the University of Michigan, and she works to address gender and racial inequalities in her field. Professor Armstrong, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this unique opportunity. Anytime we can talk about women's sports, I get giddy on the inside.
You don't even know where to get me going with this right now. Professor Armstrong, we have been talking largely about women's basketball, but we want to broaden the scope just a little bit and discuss the perception we carry about women's sports and athletes in general. You are a former hooper. I'm a former hooper. Robin is a former hooper. Did you feel supported to play basketball in the same way boys were?
Not really. I mean, but I listen, I played back in the dark ages, in the late 80s, so I'm telling you my age, and it was just different then because there was this gender ideology that determines what girls and women should be doing and what's appropriate and when it's appropriate. And so when I played, we didn't have the same type of support, but we're in a different time in our culture. Girls and women's sports was still an afterthought. It was still something that wasn't for the masses. It was just for athletes who really liked the sport, former coaches, and parents who had girls who played. So no, we didn't get the same type of support that I am really loving right now.
Which is amazing to think about. Robin, I don't know about you, but did you feel that support growing up that as a young girl playing sports, like, oh, I'm supposed to be here?
I felt it a little bit more playing soccer than I did playing basketball. Playing basketball, I was a bit of an aggressive player, and that was looked down upon. Like, yeah, but when I played soccer, it was like, yeah, go after it, like deck that person, get them. But in basketball, I felt like I had to dial it back.
Tone it down.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that literally a little bit more down the line about women in sports and our perception there playing some of these sports. But Robin, I love that because in basketball, I was the opposite. They used to tell me, you have to go and get the person. And I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do that. So, Professor,
You're too sweet. It was against your nature.
Do it. I was sitting there biting my nails. It was just ridiculous. But Professor Armstrong, just thinking about you, talking a little bit about your time not feeling supported. What does that support look like to you now? Well, how is it manifesting itself, especially when we talk about seeing more young girls playing a wide range of sports, whether it is basketball or softball or soccer or even wrestling now?
You know, I really think when we talk about support, I do think there's some nuance that's needed. So, for example, in high school, you know, we were very much supported, but keep in mind, high school is a representative community, and high school sports is where the community comes together. So I clearly felt support there, and we were pretty good. So that was the other thing. It didn't hurt that we were a pretty good team. So in high school, you know, the community supports it. But when you get to the collegiate level, it's a little bit different because people have to really want to go. In most college towns, there's a lot to do. There's a lot going on, and consumers have to be intentional in their choices. And so I think you see the differences when you get to that level at the college level and the professional level, because it's a concerted effort to determine that you want to be a consumer. Whereas for high school sports and in some places, again, there's a loyalty to the community. But what I'm seeing now, I think is fascinating. You know, I think representation matters. So the mere fact that more girls can tune in and watch basketball games and volleyball games and soccer, they can see it on TV. The media has helped to legitimize women's sports. And so the visibility and the representation has made a huge difference in garnering the support that women's sports are experiencing now.
And Professor, you know, going back to the WNBA, one of the all-time greats, Lisa Leslie, who played for the Los Angeles Sparks, was famously the first woman to dunk in the WNBA. It was a big deal at the time because people, most likely men, argued the league needed more dunking. Now the league is attracting more viewers and the amount of dunking hasn't drastically increased. What have you made of that criticism?
You know, I think finally people are realizing that different is different. It doesn't mean less than or greater than. So for a long time, you're absolutely right. People were thinking that women's basketball had to look like men's basketball to be a great product. And looking like men's basketball meant that they had to play above the rim. But now people have started to realize that women's basketball is a different game below the rim. You see strategy, you see the types of skills that you don't often see in men's basketball. Not that they're not skilled, they are, but it's a different style of play. And so what we're seeing now is people are appreciating the talent, and they're also understanding the renaissance that is women athletes. I mean, they're mothers, you know, they're wives, they're entrepreneurs, they're doing all of these kinds of things. And so I think people have learned to appreciate the talent and the skill below the rim and not necessarily having their legitimacy validated by looking like men's sports.
And speaking of, the WNBA was stereotyped as a league that was more masculine. Is that broadly how women's basketball has been perceived?
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting because, you know, we have this gender ideology that suggests some sports are feminine and it's okay for women to play. You know, like tennis and gymnastics and the soft sports, like you talked about. You know, they had to make you go play women's basketball. They had to get out your stop biting your nails and go get somebody, right?
Yep.
But that was the stereotype, is that women should play sports that are nice and are docile and non-contact. And so basketball and hockey and to some extent soccer and some of the others were perceived to be too masculine. So yes, basketball is one of those sports that have long been perceived to be a more masculine sport. And so, you know, but you know, it's really interesting because many women who play was perceived to be masculine sport. There's a concept called the apologetic. So even though they're participating in what may be considered a masculine sport, they're showing you feminine cues while they're doing so. So you may find women who are wearing makeup, who may have a bow in their hair or other things that show signs of femininity, because they're trying to deal with the cognitive dissonance of knowing that they're feminine yet participating in a masculine sport. So they've tried to find ways of buttressing and challenging the notion of what masculinity looks like and what femininity looks like.
Professor, I love that so much, because one of the things that I've been noticing, especially just in the recent years, the WNBA, when they're walking the tunnel now, and I just think to myself, I'm seeing bust down 30-inch wigs. I'm seeing, I'm seeing the best drip from head to toe.
Yes.
I'm seeing lashes. I'm seeing I'm seeing it all. And to see the culture come through this way, I mean, can you talk just a little bit about how the newer generations are embracing a different aesthetic, whether it is showing up feminine or whether it is a masculine presenting? No matter what it is, they're embracing a different aesthetic.
Listen, they are bringing the fullness of their cultural authenticity, and I absolutely love it. I like that how they've woven fashion into it. I love seeing the cultural essence of being who they are without apologizing for that. Because again, that's a part of the revolution. That's a part of the Renaissance. And listen, I don't have a problem with women owning their sexy. I don't have a problem with them dressing up their sexy and say, hey, look at me. I don't have a problem with that. And that's what I love. Sport, it does a lot of things, but it also allows us a sense of expression. And what we're seeing now, because of the popularity of the WNBA, as we were talking about, and understanding the role that these women are playing as women, as mothers, as models, as entrepreneurs, the list goes on. I love that the drip. I love, and listen, social media, has also fed into it. They like the drip.
Yes.
And that's what I love. So it's called the orange carpet. And again, I like to see that women athletes, however they identify, can bring the fullness of who they are to the arenas. Because keep in mind, basketball and sports is what they do. It is not the totality of who they are as people. So they're giving us a new introduction to who they are, how they are, and why they are. And I love it.
Allow us to reintroduce ourselves.
Exactly.
Hey, you're listening to the Metro 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're discussing how the perception of the WNBA has changed over time. We're talking to Professor Keitra Armstrong. She's a professor of sports management at the University of Michigan and works to address gender and racial inequities in her field. And we also want to know, if you watch women's sports, give us a call, 313-577-1019. Professor Armstrong, you've already had a few mic drops. One thing I want to go back to is social media, and I wonder if you could orient us around how that is helping or elevating athletes' lives nowadays, specifically women's lives.
It is a power tool. Social media has become the power tool. It's a magic wand. It's a silver bullet in some regards. Because for so long, the organized media the different entities were controlling the narrative. They were controlling the images, and they were trying to determine for us what we should look at and how we should look at athletes and sports and what we should do, etc. And we know that many of the people who are controlling the media are mostly male, mostly white. And so for women, and for women of color, who tells their story? And why should their story have to be filtered through the lens of an ideology that does not represent them? Social media gave them the control. It made them the executive producers. It made them to be the directors of their images and their narratives. And it gave them so much power and so much ability to touch the fans and touch the consumers without it being filtered through an organized media. Social media has made all the difference in the world.
And it has me wondering then how that sort of trickles down to younger audiences when we think about young girls and the way girls and boys are encouraged to play sports in different ways, and the messaging that girls might be getting from, let's say, social media that tells them, no, you can play it exactly how you want to. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, and that's the voice that's been missing for so long. For so long, women have been told what to do, how to do it, etc. And oftentimes the voice has come through a gendered lens, oftentimes a male-centered lens, a male-normed lens. And so what we find with social media, again, there are different voices, and the different voices can speak to the different constituents. So the athletes, be it in college or high school, they can send the messages that they know they wish they would have received when they were younger. And so what we're seeing is an element of empowerment. Social media has become an empowering tool for the young girls. It gives them something to aspire to. And the way that I see it, it's what we're seeing is a vision of inspiration. So, and we see it through social media. And so they're trying to show the little girls and the little boys, what's possible. And I gotta tell you, the thing I love the most, and I go to the women's Final Four, I'm still a basketball enthusiast. And the thing that I love is when I see little boys in this one particular shirt that I love. Normally if someone tells a little boy, you shoot like a girl, that's not a compliment, right? That's not a compliment. Man, you play like a girl. But what I love is I see these little boys and they wear a shirt, and this particular shirt says, you wish you shot like a girl. Mm-hmm. Like reclaiming the narrative, saying you wish you played like a girl. And so what we're seeing is there are different messages that are coming through social media, but those messages are not just for girls. I'm also seeing it for the fathers and the boys and the girl dads, And so again, social media has expanded the catchment area. They can reach people who don't have to depend on the traditional channels for their sport information.
Professor Armstrong, speaking of some of the men who are in this space, let's go to the phones because we have Dave from Wayne Memorial High School on the line, and Dave coaches wrestling. Dave, can you talk about how your program has changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So our program in itself started with one girl in 2022. And then we've grown tremendously since then. We had about 15 girls on the team this year. And so there's been a lot of higher visibility with the women's side of wrestling in the past few years, whether that be at the Olympic level or as far as just the Michigan High School Athletic Association recognizing girls as their own division. So we've seen a tremendous increase in our program. But then even across the state, women's wrestling is up 419% since 2021.
Wow, Dave, if I may jump in, forgive me. So you see the Olympics as one reason for that. Could you point to any other factors?
I think the recognition in the state of Michigan as a standalone girls division has also been a huge factor. And then also, it's hard to be the first one to do anything, especially as a teenager, and a teenager in a classically male-dominated space. And so once they see peers, once they see teammates that are doing it, that barrier to entry starts becoming decreased. And so we started small, but then we grew very fast because, it's not like you're the only girl on the team anymore.
Dave from Wayne Memorial High School, thank you so much for giving us a call and telling us about this massive growth in girls' interest in wrestling. Professor Armstrong, back to you. I'm wondering what are some other sports that girls are beginning to play that they were not playing as much before? Did you see the NFL ads promoting flag football for high school girls, and as well the Nike ads promoting women in sports? I'm wondering, what do you think about the expansion of other sports for women as well?
Listen, I love it. There's nothing that women cannot do from my perspective when we talk about sports. And so I like the fact that we're expanding the boundaries of what's acceptable. It's not a matter of whether they can do it, it's the general cultural acceptability of our society. So yes, I love the flag football. I love that commercial or flag football. And I love the way that they show the female athlete and her dominance.
Yes.
Like I just love that. And I also think that, Nike has always been at the forefront of the whole notion of girls empowerment, women empowerment. They did a commercial a long time ago saying, "If you let me play," because people were concerned that sports was harming females' bodies. So Nike has really tried to elevate the social cultural importance of women in sport. And so I like that. I love women participating in hockey, women participating in wrestling, in all the sports. I mean, we talked about the power of sport and what we learn through sport. To deprive females of the opportunity to learn to be resilient, to learn to lose gracefully, to learn to set goals. And the research tells us that many of the women who are leaders in the Fortune 500 companies attribute their success to having been a former athlete at some level. And so I just think that girls and women should participate in every type of physical activity. And I like that we're expanding the boundaries of which activities we're comfortable seeing them participate in. So I love the fact that we're expanding those boundaries.
Professor Armstrong, I spoke with a girl who likes to play hockey and other sports that girls don't typically play. Kyla Ryan is 11 years old, and she started skating at 2 years old. Here's what she had to say about joining a hockey team with mostly boys on it. What first got you interested in wanting to play hockey?
My aunt, she wanted me to just have experiences with a lot of sports that weren't dominated by girls and women in general. So she kind of got me into hockey, and then I just stuck with it.
What's your first memory on the ice playing hockey?
Probably having my stick on the ice and learning how to actually hold the stick and the proper way to fall without hurting yourself more than it is falling on the ice. It felt kind of weird, but it was for your safety, so you kind of had to.
So you came onto the team last year, and you were the fourth girl to join this co-ed team. And what happened? What kind of reactions did you get from, this is a team that's a majority boys. There are 15 boys. What was their reaction?
Their reaction was they were questioning why there had to be more girls on the team. Because I'm not sure if they really thought this, but it gave off they're like, it's only a boys' sport. Why should they be on it? And it just weren't accepting of more girls being on the team, because I don't think they thought girls would be able to help the team.
And how did that make you feel about being on the team?
I wanted to show them hey, I'm on your team. You have to deal with it. So we're too old to be on the same team. You can't do anything about it. The most you can do is complain. You can be my friend. You're not getting rid of me till I can't play.
So it didn't discourage you at all?
It was the complete opposite. It encouraged me to stay on that team and to not quit that team at all. My sisters, when I told them that I played hockey and I was learning how to ice skate, they were confused and scared, because but you're a girl, that's not a girly sport. So I thought since I could do it, everybody, I don't it doesn't matter if you're a girl, if you're a boy, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can get on the ice and skate.
That was 11-year-old Kyla Ryan. She is full of confidence, and it sounds like playing sports, Professor Armstrong, really has done that for her, especially sports that have long been dominated by boys and men. How do we continue to support the dreams of young girls like Kyla, regardless of the sport they play, so they can achieve those dreams?
Yeah, I can hear her confidence oozing through, and it is so exciting, because what she's learning in that process is going to serve her well, as an adult in any area of a career pursuit that she has. We have to continue to support them. We have to continue to normalize that, and that's the challenge. We don't want kids kind of feeling like I'm out of place, like I'm an invader, because I'm on boys' turf. We have to normalize the whole notion that sport can be ungendered, that the skills can be ungendered in many regards. And so we have to continue to provide financial support. We have to provide access and opportunities. We have to provide safety, because I'm sure she is getting a lot of not so pleasant gender kind of jokes. So we have to create an environment that protects her mental that protects her overall psyche, so we just have to provide a holistic level of support, and we have to normalize these situations where girls are perceived to be working on boys' turfs. And so, in conversations like these, I got to tell you, the more we can talk about these things in the community and inspire mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and just everyone to understand that sport is a powerful tool for lifelong success.
I'm going to stop you right there. That is a beautiful place for us to end. We are out of time. Keitra Armstrong is a professor of sports management at the University of Michigan. She works to address gender and racial inequities in her field. Professor Armstrong, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.